Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. This is a nice turnout for sure. My name's Doug Burt. I'm a public information officer in our information branch. I get to communicate messages, what's happening with game and fish, specifically related to hunting and fishing and the outdoor environment. So I'm blessed with a very fun job. One of them was promoting this event, so it looks like we did a pretty good job. So I want to welcome everybody that showed up today to the Arizona Game and Fish Department's Bighorn Sheep Mountain Lion Educational Workshop Seminar. In addition to everybody that showed up here today, we're actually webcasting this live right now through the internet. It's a new system we just put in place. And so there's people at home in front of their computers enjoying this seminar as well. And the last report I got was we were just under about 100 viewers. So welcome to everybody that's at home watching this online. We appreciate you joining and attending, and hope you enjoy the presentation. Today's presentation is to cover some of the natural history, the management effects, and some of the biological and social issues related to bighorn sheep and mountain lions, these two really unique creatures in Arizona. We put together a panel of three really super experts in the biology field to bring you a presentation and try to give you some insight on these guys. The first one is Pat Barber. He's our Yuma Regional Supervisor. He's been with the department for 14 years, has vast knowledge in wildlife management, law enforcement issues, and also the manager of that Yuma region, which is one of our satellite offices throughout the state. We have 6 throughout the state. We also have John Herbert. John is the Wildlife Program Manager. He's also out of our Yuma region. John's been a wildlife biologist with bighorn sheep and mule deer for over 30 years, so he's going to really give us a lot of deep insight what he knows about these magnificent animals. And also we have Ron Thompson. He's our mountain lion and bear biologist. Ron actually worked for the department, then retired, and now he's back working with us again. So Ron has a lot of years' experience in wildlife sciences, so he'll certainly be able to enlighten us quite a bit about those elusive species. When all the presentations are concluded, what we're going to do is we're going to have a question and answer session, and that's going to allow you guys to ask us some questions, maybe things that we didn't address or concerns that you have or some other ideas that you maybe didn't hear in the presentation. So when everybody's done giving their presentation, I'll let you guys raise your hands and we'll get your questions answered. The good thing about today is online, you guys are going to be able to participate virtually as well. The page that you're viewing the webcast on, you should be able to see an email link or a click to ask your question button on that page. If you click that, basically it'll generate an email. You go ahead and type in your question and send that. We'll receive it here in the theater while you're doing that, and we have some folks that will print that out, and I'll be able to read that question to our panel of experts, and hopefully we'll be able to get your questions answered. Obviously our goal is to answer all the questions, but if time permitting we can't get to them, we'll be able to still collect those questions, get an answer written up for you, and we'll get those posted on our website at a later date. Addition to that, the people that aren't here or aren't watching online will be able to save this. Basically it'll be a video, and people will be able to view it at a later date. So if you enjoyed it or you wanted to share it with a member of your family or a friend and said, hey, I saw something really neat, you should check this out, you'll be able to find that on our website as well. And hopefully it will combine all those questions and answers with that. So that's kind of our format today. I'll do one quick housekeeping I did before. The restrooms are just outside in the main lobby. If anybody needs to use the bathroom, it's just right out the double door and to the right, and there's a drinking fountain there. So it's kind of an informal process. And that's what we have. The first one up for us today is going to be Ron Thompson. He's going to start us off with the wildlife biology on mountain lions. So Ron Thompson, please.
Good evening, folks. I want to thank you all for coming. I want you all to know that these people here have got a real passion for wildlife, and you do too. That's why you're here. We're going to be talking about not just mountain lions and bighorn sheep, but really how they come together in terms of management. The Arizona Game and Fish Department is charged with the responsibility and the authority to manage these very unique animals. And we feel very fortunate to have both desert bighorn sheep and mountain lions in the state of Arizona. We don't give one a higher priority than the other. We want to point that out right up front. Could I go ahead and have the first part of the talk, please? We've got a little sound pick here. We're going to try to play for you. First of all, while we're waiting for that, how many people here have seen a mountain lion in the wild? Not at a zoo, but in the wild. Raise your hand, please. How many here have seen more than one in the wild? 5 in the wild. Okay, there's 4 people. That's amazing. I've seen 3. Radio colors. Okay. One of our purposes too is engage the public. I want to direct some of these comments to the Boy Scouts back here. What is that, troop? What is that noise? A mountain lion. Okay, thank you very much. You guys are real sharp. Track 2, please. What kind of bird is that? The oriole? What kind of bird is that? Speak up. A bald eagle. Very good. No, that's exactly the same animal, folks. That's exactly the same. That's exactly the same animal. That was the last part. Was a female communicating with the kittens, or the kittens communicating with the female when they're traveling at night and hunting. That's how mountain lions communicate. So at one point in time, all mountain lions have made that sound, both male and female. And that's one of the purposes for this talk, is to try to, learn new things. And we're going to learn new things from you folks too when this is all over and done. I guess I've been clicking the clicker, huh? I want to go back to, again, the purpose of the talk. For the next few minutes, I'm going to discuss the world of the mountain lion. I hope to do it at times through the eyes of the mountain lion, through their senses themselves. The title of this talk is just simply Mountain Lion. I think that says quite a bit. It's a very charismatic, large, focal, apex carnivore within our environment. It's very, very important. It's at the top of the food chain. It actually regulates the ungulates and prey items that it is underneath it that it preys on. So, it just doesn't go by mountain lion. It goes by mountain lion in the state of Arizona, but there are 83 known names for mountain lion. Panther, cougar, or catamount. How many of you have ever heard that word, catamount? Very good. That is a common word. It's also the name of a beer, so got an idea there. That's slang for cat on the mountain. Did you know that? It's just kind of just a slang name that was pieced together. And of course, in Arizona, we've got the mountain lion. Mountain lion is one of 37 species of felids in the world, and it's not by any means the rarest. Some of the cats of some of the 37 species. In fact, the mountain lion listed by the International Union for Conservation of Nature actually lists it as a species of least concern. There's other cats out there that really are far more imperiled than our mountain lion could ever be, or that we would ever view it to be. Such things as the Borneo bay cat, the flat-headed cat, the sand cat. Have any of you ever heard these names before? Yeah, go to Wikipedia and kind of go scroll through the 37 species. It's just fascinating where these animals are and what they do and how they live. The mountain lion is most closely related to the jaguarundi and the cheetah. In case you didn't know that, that's their major. That's what the cousins. And at one time, there was 36 subspecies listed in Arizona, just based on morphological or descriptive characteristics. And we had 3 in Arizona. One was down in the Yuma area. It's called the Yuma puma. And for a long time, until just recently, in fact, everybody thought the Yuma puma was this unique species down there that was actually endangered, living in the desert. Well, in 1999, there was a published paper by a professor at the University of Arizona now, currently, Dr. Melanie Cover. She's in the co-op unit, wildlife co-op unit down there. And in her landmark work, she reduced it down to 6 species. But mountain lions have experienced a mysterious and interesting past, very interesting. And this is all pretty much discovered through genetics. Mountain lions were actually extirpated or extinct in North America from what we can tell from the fossil record. At the end of the Pleistocene, when all the megafauna became extinct, the larger ungulates, and we had cheetahs running around here in the southern part of the United States here. The mountain lion became extinct and was actually, its range was receded down into South America. I'll get this button right first, eventually. Okay, I want to talk about the distribution and status of the mountain lion when European man first arrived, or woman arrived in the United States. It was pretty much the purple. There were mountain lions all across North America. Because of the intolerance of humans, they pretty much reduced it down to what you see here, which is also happens to be almost the current distribution for the mountain lion. This is a picture of what we believe is currently the distribution of mountain lions, with occurrences and sightings depicted by the round dots here on the screen. And this information is kept and managed by the Cougar Network. It's called cougarnetwork.org. And you can go to the website and follow that. They have periodical updates. But what was interesting was, at one time, the mountain lion in Florida, also known as the Florida panther, was believed to be, again, a separate subspecies. But through the genetics work, we discovered it wasn't. That mountain lion population in Florida was going extinct. It was just being crowded in by development and was predicted to be extinct. It had actually gotten down to between 2 and 6 individuals at one time, and then to 50, back up to 50. But they're experiencing some really strange genetic morphological characteristics: kink tails, little whorls on the back of their back. They weren't doing real well, but because of the genetics, they were able to take mountain lions from Texas, translocate them in Florida, and release them. And now that population, they believe, is about 100 to 120. And for the first time ever this year, a few weeks ago, the mountain lion left Florida and went to Georgia. That's huge. They're coming from both directions now. So I want everybody to kind of keep that picture in mind in terms of what's going on in North America. There's nothing in between Florida and the rest of the distribution, but lots and lots of deer and livestock and human beings. So it's going to be an interesting time that we're going to be watching over the next decade. This is the distribution in Arizona. What we feel is the distribution. This was mapped by our wildlife managers out there who have the best feel for what's going on in terms of their individual district and what their mountain lion distributions are and the numbers. Came up with some density figures through the red areas that were the heaviest areas that we felt had the best mountain lion habitat and mountain lions, and then there was a gradation beyond that. The gray areas are the tribal authority lands that we do not have authority over, and we don't predict their numbers or guess their numbers at all. Mountain lions have huge movement patterns, some larger than others. This map here depicts all the GPS data that we have from radio-collared mountain lions with the newest technology, that is satellite telemetry, that tells us that locates on a GPS program where a mountain lion is, whatever we program it in, every 4 hours, every 6 hours, whatever. It records it and we download it onto this kind of a map. These are some of the movements that we've experienced. As you can tell, oops, that's not the laser. This area right here, this mountain lion here, went all the way from Oracle area, all the way up around San Carlos Lake, all the way up towards the White Mountains, back down, ended up over here in Roosevelt Lake. And did that multiple times, crossed numerous state highways on its way. How big do mountain lions get? Females usually weigh less than 70 pounds. I personally never have weighed one over 60 pounds. So around that 70-pound mark. Males can get as big as about 165. This is a 165-pound male to give you an idea what a largest mountain lion in the wild would be like. Other than that, they're usually around 120. The ones on the COFA are around that 100 to 110 mark. I kind of call them the marathon runners of the mountain lion world. They really are lean animals, much leaner than ones you might find further north. I want to talk a little bit about the biology of mountain lions. Mountain lions are polygynous. That means they mate with more than one mate. They're polyestrous. They can breed every month. Their gestation period's 92 days. They can have they produce a litter on the average and raise it every 17 months. Females start breeding at about 22 months. Males at about 2 years. So those are just the basics. The kittens are born blind. In about 2 weeks, they open their eyes. They have fur when they're born. That's called altricial. At about 5 months, their eyes are blue when they're first born. At about 5 months, it turns to that color that you saw originally in the first slide, and that was a real dark amber color. But there's always an exception, folks, with mountain lions. I don't care if it's distance, number of mountain lions in a litter, or what have you. There's always an exception with mountain lions. That's what amazes me about them as an animal. This is an adult male animal with blue eyes. Somehow it retained its recessive trait. It's the first one that I've ever seen a picture of, or that I know of. But if you see a picture of a mountain lion with blue eyes, it's usually something that's been photoshopped. This has not been. We once thought in the 70s and into the 80s that mountain lions populations were regulated socially. That is, once you reached a certain number of mountain lions, there was this intraspecific strife that occurred, and mountain lions began killing other mountain lions, and that's how they regulated their population. That's really what the original work showed through the old type telemetry work, where we had to go out there and actually find the mountain lion first and then try to follow around all day. And then you'd find these mountain lions every so often that were killed because of a fight. And they do fight. They're just like cats. You hear cats outside your window probably every week where they're fighting. Mountain lions are the same way. This mountain lion here was killed by another male during a fight. So it does occur. But what they've really found out in a landmark case study in New Mexico was that mountain lions are regulated by their food supply, not by social structure. This would be a typical map of a mountain lion home ranges on the landscape. The pink being the females, and the green being the males. How do I know that without hardly looking at that the pink would be the females? Because mothers allow their daughters to live within their territory and to utilize their food source if there's enough food source there. They allow that. Pretty much as we do in human society, where mothers are pretty close to the daughters, whereas the son has got to hit the trail. They've got to leave. They've got to disperse. They have to immigrate, much as I told my son he had to do when he was of that age. Males do overlap, but most frequently they just kind of come up against each other. They might use a ridge or a canyon bottom to say, whoa, this is the boundary of another male. And they do that by leaving scent stations throughout their range. They use their feet to make scrapes, usually some duff that they then defecate on or urinate on, and they rub up on rocks, and another mountain lion can tell that, hey, there's another male out here in this area. Talk about prey selection by mountain lions. For their body mass, mountain lions can kill the largest prey known of any cat species, proportionately to their body size. And this is typically what happens in northern Arizona. We have mountain lions killing full-grown bull elk. And it's hard to believe until you've gone up on one of these big bull elk, and they've got sticks on top of them that mountain lions have tried to cover, have not done a very good job. They do cover their prey, their dead prey. They feel it's to keep additional scavengers off, like vultures. But they have no problem in at least attempting to attack these larger animals like this. And they're built for it. I mean, they've evolved for it. This is a typical mountain lion foot. They have retractable claws. As you saw in that big male picture, they have huge forearms. Their front feet or legs are shorter than the rear feet. That's because they're an ambush predator. They rely on cover. They use those hind legs for quick thrusts and charges at prey. They use their front feet, rotating wrist, retractable claws, a poleaxe instead of as a thumb to grip and to hang on to their prey while they're biting it. They've got conical canines, carnassials for breaking bones and for ripping meat and shredding meat. They've got just huge muscles in their jaws. Very, very strong animals. If you had a female mountain lion right here that was partially tranquilized that wanted to get up and walk off, and you grabbed it by the tail, a little 70 to 60 pound female mountain lion, you could not hold that mountain lion from dragging you across the mat. That's all. I just wanted to describe that to you because that happened to me. I actually tried to do that just to see what the power of that animal felt like, and they're extremely powerful. This is the animal that we know that they prey on the most. Study after study after study, they evolved with this ungulate, with deer as their major prey item. They are deer specialists, as we call them. But they've been known to kill every ungulate in Arizona. There's such a thing as called a sanitation hypothesis, whereby if you're weak and injured, you're going to fall prey to a predator. That's probably true. But mountain lions don't select for weak and injured animals. The sanitation hypothesis has been proven against. In other words, if they compared the number of healthy animals versus the number of injured animals that a mountain lion killed over a year, there would be no significant difference. Okay, the sick and injured would represent the same in the kill as probably in the population. They're also scavengers. This is a 3-month-old cow carcass that a mountain lion is eating on, and he lived off this thing for 3 days. And everything inside that thing, I can guarantee you, none of us would like to smell, let alone even touch. It was literally soup. But this is what this healthy mountain lion was eating on. There's a study going on in South Dakota whereby the biologist is actually using dead road-killed deer to run a route, throw out into different washes, bait mountain lions into those areas so that he can then capture them and study them. But he uses dead animals to capture these animals. Livestock. Let's talk about livestock real quick because livestock industry is real important in Arizona. We're the West. Mountain lions do kill significant amounts of livestock in certain areas of the state. It can be statewide, but it's significant in certain parts of the state. For instance, around Klondike, Arizona, the U.S. government has employed, there's 2 mountain lion hunters that all they do is respond full-time to mountain lion livestock depredation kills. And this is what a typical livestock kill would look like. And that is where a mountain lion would enter not only a cow, but a deer through the side by usually shearing off the ribs. First, they clip the hair with their incisors. They make it nice and clean, and then they don't just start grabbing pieces of meat. They're very neat animals. And then you can see some sticks that were kind of laid on this thing. In the Klondike area, livestock, in terms of frequency of occurrence, make up 44% of the diet that we have found in scat in the springtime. So it's rather significant because calves are, during the springtime, perfect prey size, around 200 to 300 pounds. That's the size they like. And that just happens to be about the same size as a deer. So that they are selecting for an animal that's approximately a deer-sized animal, usually. How many do we, how big of a problem is it? This slide here represents what, we consider the depredation harvest of mountain lions in Arizona. It's not that relative to the rest of the recreational harvest. It's not that significant. Some years it's worse than others. In that 2000, 2001 period, we had a drought. And, mountain lions might have been having a hard time making a living that year, and they prey switch. They can switch to different species of prey. It's called prey switching. Very significant trait of a mountain lion. What is Arizona doing in terms of lion management? I think this slide here represents it all. That slide on the left, the pie chart, represents what we do, what is harvested in Arizona in terms of the makeup in the harvest. About 22% males, 28% females, 16% subadult females, 34% subadult males. The subadults are vulnerable to harvest because they're the ones that are leaving and traveling a lot, trying to find to establish a home range of their own. So they're much more vulnerable to someone that's out there maybe hunting mountain lions or moving more. Whereas an adult female, for instance, may spend a lot of time in one little small canyon. What Arizona's doing is they want to protect the female segment of the mountain lion population. That's what's the resilient part of the population. That is what's going to allow mountain lion populations to recover, either because of an over-harvesting event or some kind of a natural event, a drought, for instance, or a disease event. Mountain lions do get diseases. We're studying that. There's more and more interest being looked at in terms of the mountain lion disease part of it. Wyoming had 5 animals last year that they verified were killed as a result of plague. Mountain lions have killed 1 individual in Arizona, but it was dead when it killed that individual. That mountain lion had plague, and the individual that was studying that animal had a radio collar, and he did a necropsy on it after it was dead, and he died of the plague a few days later. So I want to kind of make that point. There have been a few attacks, not many, but we have had 1 mortality in Arizona from a dead mountain lion. I think that's a little ironic. Something that's so efficient at being able to kill something, us for sure easily if they wanted to. New Mexico experienced a mortality last summer. 55-year-old male out on a kind of a bluff, was living in the woods in a trailer, goes out there and shaves every day. They found him partially consumed by a mountain lion. I showed you this slide earlier, but this slide, there's one difference. Can anybody tell me what the difference is on this slide? The Boy Scouts. Speak up, please. There's more lines. There are more lines. That's a correct answer. What kind of lines? Freeway lines is what has been now placed on this map. What's the next relationship that you see on this map of the freeways versus the lines where mountain lions move and travel around? How many lines do you see crossing the freeway? You see there's lines going adjacent to the freeway. There's a couple up there north, just west of Flagstaff, that have crossed. One of them was because the mountain lion was road killed, and the person picked up the mountain lion and took it home. He crossed the freeway with it. Okay? This is the reason. How many here would try to cross Interstate 10 at night between Phoenix and Tucson? It's suicide. It's suicide for mountain lions, too. We have a number of roadkills. We have a roadkill database that we keep. It's unfortunate, but we're trying to look at that problem more and more. We're trying to provide some kind of a passage for these animals, either through underpasses or overpasses. If we want to maintain genetic diversity in all those areas throughout the state, we're going to have to do that. Or we're going to have to maybe move mountain lions. Or we're going to end up like 6 Floridas. The state of Arizona is divided up into 6 units based on the freeway system. But this is the future of the mountain lion and our future for Arizona. This is the projected growth for 2050. I don't know if we'll get there because of the economic situation. It's kind of changed things a little bit, slowed things down. But that's probably what it's going to look like eventually. This is something we have to think about and plan for. And we have to plan for this too. We have to provide linkages and corridors for mountain lions. and other wildlife. You just can't provide corridors for predators. You have to allow corridors and linkages for the prey too. This is being looked at, and the department has a huge investment, as does the ADOT, Arizona Department of Transportation, in this effort. And we're talking, very substantial amounts of money. It's not cheap to build an overpass over an interstate. It's just not cheap. And kind of almost want to close with the fact that we also have a border fence going in along the border down in Arizona. This is a possible impact too. We're hoping to look at that some more. We don't really know what our impacts are to some of these animals as a result of our activities. Lastly, I just want to say we do manage for human mountain lion conflicts. We have a protocol that says the mountain lion's actions are acceptable or unacceptable. People in this room are responsible for help developing that through a lot of scenarios. For instance, was the mountain lion at a schoolyard when the kids are getting out? Does it show aggressive actions? Does it not retreat? There's a number of things but we respond to each and every mountain lion call the same. Each employee that goes out there has this chart, and they look at it and they go, okay, it's unacceptable. We have to do something versus acceptable. But our public safety is number one concern in this, not the mountain lion safety. I personally just want to end with this, saying I think there's light at the end of the tunnel for the mountain lion. I think it's going to be with us for a long time. I think it's going to recolonize the rest of North America and fill in the gap. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ron. I don't think I've seen so many mountain lion pictures. Now I know who to go to when I'm looking for a mountain lion picture. Good stuff. All right. And I'm sure everybody's full of questions. We're going to go through a couple more presentations, and we'll collect all those questions at the end, if that's okay. All right. Next, we're going to have John Herbert, who's going to explain the history and background of desert bighorn sheep for us. Move some of this stuff out of the way so you don't start reading my notes, or you'll be way off track. Thank you.
Good evening. Glad to be here. I hope I can answer all your questions by the end of the night. There's a lot to cover about when it comes to desert bighorn ecology. I mean, that's a broad subject. I'm going to try to narrow it to what I think is important and relevant to the issues that are facing the Game and Fish Department relative to bighorn sheep population dynamics, the interface with mountain lions, and the challenges ahead for us. By the way, this is a picture of 3 females. What's very interesting about bighorn sheep, and what allows us to do very good work with bighorn sheep, is the fact that you can sex and age the animals while doing a survey, say flying by in a helicopter. We take pictures of bighorn sheep during these surveys with fancy digital cameras with image stabilized lenses. And this allows us to analyze those photos and see things that we didn't notice as we flew by. And it also reduces the level of harassment of these animals, because we don't have to hover over them and count and try to figure out, is that a male, is that a female, whatever it might be. But this is a picture of 3 females. And you can tell by their horn, and I don't know if you can see this little red dot, but the horn of a female is generally thin and long. Now, you'll see some pictures of males, and of course they have the big massive horns depending on their age. This female up on the left is a younger female. You can see it's a smaller horn, a little bit darker in color. But it is a mature female. This is what we like to see in a healthy population, young. We like to see the lambs. We like to see a yearling. This small animal right here is a yearling female. So not only can we tell its age, we can tell the sex again from the air. So that's very good information to get. It allows us to compile life tables, for example. That's very useful in understanding the dynamics of the population. 2 females, 2 lambs, and a yearling. And that female yearling is probably related to one of those 2 ewes. Bighorn sheep are thought to be a very highly social animal for an ungulate, for an animal of this type. There's a lot of behavior, there's a lot of information passed on from one animal to the other. There's a socialization that's very complex compared to, say, white-tailed deer. White-tailed deer tend to live more solitary lives, interacting for breeding seasons and so forth, but for the most part, they don't interact with each other a lot. Whereas bighorn sheep, if they can, they're found in rather large groups. And that's really dependent upon the range conditions or the amount of food that's out there in their natural environment. If there's plenty of food, they tend to be in larger groups. If they're having difficulty finding food, then they typically are found in groups of 2 or less. This is what we often see as we're flying by in the helicopter. And again, we take this type of a picture, and then we can analyze it. Can anybody tell me what's wrong with this picture? Exactly. Because the key to any healthy population is the recruitment of young. I mean, that seems obvious, but believe me, sometimes that's a hard lesson to learn when you're looking at what's going on with a population. What we have here is basically on the right side, 6 females. They're all probably greater than 5 years of age. And then segregated on the left, the males. I don't know if you noticed, but this particular male is sticking his tongue out at us. Highly socialized animal. I don't know what comment that was, because we didn't hover there very long. We took their picture and then left. But anyway, in any case, yes, this is very much a concern to us, because you would think with 6 females, at least one of them would have a lamb still. And this is going to be the focus of what I'm talking about tonight, is their ability to recruit new members into the population, and some of the dynamics that goes along with that, things that harm bighorn sheep, what kills them, how long do they live, those kinds of things, those considerations. Maybe hard to see, but this is a young lamb. I don't know if you can see it right in the center of the picture. This is a lamb that's probably about 30 days old, and the mother up above her on the rock. I took this picture in late July a few years back. Typically, with bighorn sheep, the lambs are seen, let me just say, with bighorn sheep, lambs can be born any month of the year. And this is what separates them from other ungulates in Arizona. Most every other species in Arizona have relatively narrow periods of time, maybe 1 month, maybe spread over 2 months, when the young are born. And the reasons for that is, it's thought that they're adapting to when the conditions are best for survival. So there's food for the mother to make milk to, wean the young with. And or it's thought to be involved with, if you saturate the habitat with young, predators will have less of an influence than if you spread it out over a longer period of time. So it's thought to be an adaptation to try to concentrate your young, your birthing at a certain time of year. And what I'm getting at is bighorn sheep, although wonderfully adapted to the desert, aren't perfectly adapted to the desert. This is my opinion, and I'm going to try to elaborate on this a little bit. Bighorn sheep are not native to North America. It's thought that they first crossed the Bering land bridge from Asia around 70 to 100,000 years ago, and the ancestors of bighorn sheep. The Sonoran Desert is thought to be approximately 9,000 years old. We manage bighorn sheep in the Sonoran Desert. The plant communities that we see in the Sonoran Desert are thought to be maybe 4,000 years old. So it's relatively, what we're seeing and what we're studying is relatively a new thing. In other words, the habitats outside of Yuma, where I live, actually had pinyon juniper trees in the Gila Mountains. The Gila Mountains now receive less than 2 inches of rain a year. So over a 10,000 year period, that habitat has undergone major changes. Again, back to adaptation. You can see one of the adaptations is they blend in with their environment, which is a good thing. They're often the same color as the background, or they're cryptically colored so that they do blend in. So it makes it harder to be seen by predators. This is that lamb. Unfortunately, the fact that this lamb was born late in the summer probably reduced its chances of survival. And again, since they are giving birth over a wide period of time, many of the lambs do not actually survive. And this is a key problem for us with managing a bighorn sheep population, is that they have a very low reproductive potential compared to other species. Bighorn sheep may breed, if they're in very good health, they may breed as a yearling. In other words, they're coming 2 years of age. But most of the time what we see in the desert is that they don't successfully breed and give birth to offspring until they're maybe 3 or even 4 years of age. So again, that really limits the potential of the population to grow. Bighorn sheep can live to be maybe 13 or 14 years of age, but again, that depends on the conditions at the time. If you're, say, a 10-year-old female and you suddenly go into a 3 or 4 year drought cycle, which is very common in our desert, then your chances of survival is going to be diminished compared to if you happen to be 10 years of age and you're moving into a 4 or 5 year wet cycle. But in any case, as you start to look at individual bighorn sheep and the likelihood that they're going to be able to produce an offspring, survive it, and replace themselves over time, it becomes a problem. It becomes a problem depending on the environmental conditions and other factors as we'll get into. And again, I want to make a contrast. Although bighorn sheep share this Sonoran Desert with other ungulates, for example, desert mule deer, they really have different reproductive strategies. They have different potential to grow as a population. It's common for us to see mule deer numbers following a very wet year to nearly double in a single year. In other words, they're giving birth to twins, and if the conditions are very good, the twins both live, or a large number of them do, and the population suddenly increases dramatically. That's in contrast to bighorn sheep, even though they may be in the same area, occupying the mountains, of course, where mule deer are typically found in the valleys below. We don't see those kinds of increases, even though the conditions are very favorable. And the reason for that is somewhat complex and difficult to understand. I'll give you for instance. With bighorn sheep, if you're born, say you're a lamb and you're born in December, but it's raining and it's very cold, there might be plenty of food for the mother to make milk, and she's making plenty of milk, but the lamb may die from pneumonia because it's stressed by the cold, wet conditions. So as a former supervisor of mine told me, he says, bighorn sheep are born into this world looking for a way to die. That was his description of it. And I think it's accurate because there's so many things that can harm and take bighorn. Here's another species, another ungulate, the Sonoran pronghorn, which is an endangered species of pronghorn found in southwestern Arizona. This animal also has a tremendous reproductive potential compared to bighorn sheep. They typically give birth to twins. And again, during those really wet years, we see this population of pronghorn jump dramatically, maybe increasing by 40%, 50% or more. So the problem is, that's a very good strategy of being able to increase very quickly, rapidly under ideal conditions. However, bighorn sheep don't respond the same way. So what I'm getting at is, although bighorn sheep are wonderfully adapted in many ways, one of the problems with bighorn sheep is the reproductive system. Their strategy, it doesn't lend itself very well to circumstances where there's high adult mortality or more lamb mortality than the population can sustain. This is a graphic of what it looked like for bighorn sheep in around 1900. Where bighorn sheep were found is basically the western and southwestern portions of the state. By this time, we'd already lost populations of bighorn sheep in Arizona. There used to be bighorn sheep near Flagstaff on the San Francisco Peak. By the turn of the century, they're all gone. The same thing in the Chevelon Canyon area, the Blue and Black River areas of eastern Arizona. The reasons are not well understood, but it's basically understood or thought that these extinctions were the combination of many factors, possibly competition with cattle for resources, most likely, in my opinion, disease transmission from domestic livestock. Because the one thing that is well documented in the literature is if you take a goat or a domestic sheep and you put it in a pen with a desert bighorn, and this has been done many, many times, the bighorn is dead within 48 hours. They are very susceptible to the diseases that domestic livestock, in particular goats and sheep, carry, and it acts on them very quickly. This is an example of what can happen. This is a ram that was radio collared as part of a study in the Silverbell Mountains. It contracted a disease that led to blindness. And so obviously being blind in the wild is not a good thing, and this animal succumbed to that. Another very common disease is we call it chronic sinusitis. It's thought to be introduced to the animal by a botfly that crawls up the nose. It's a bacteria that basically attacks the horn, core, the skull of the animal. And what results is things break off. In this case, the horn has come off, and that's an open sore. And that bighorn, although it may be genetically fit, is no longer able to breed because of the loss of its horn. It's weakened by the infection. Its life is most likely shortened by this particular disease. And this is not an uncommon disease. We see this and document it from the air, from the skulls that we pick up. Again, the horn or the skull itself is actually eaten by the bacteria, so it creates open wounds that are very harmful to the animal. This is what bighorn sheep distribution looked like around 1960. I mention this era because this is when the Game and Fish Department really earnestly started proactively managing bighorn sheep. And biologists like John Russo and others were doing some of the pioneer work on bighorn sheep to understand the biology, the ecology of this animal. And what I want to point out here is you can see that the distribution shrank from the 1900s, so we had lost ground in that 60-year period. But at least by 1960, we had established a new population in Aravaipa Canyon, which is this little hard-to-see little black circle in southeastern Arizona. The current bighorn sheep distribution, see, that's depicted by the brown color. And we've been very successful at reestablishing bighorn sheep in many habitats where they were historically found. And I personally take a lot of pride in being able to participate in that kind of activity, to put bighorn sheep back in habitats where they existed at one time. However, the state is changing. As Ron pointed out, we have ever-increasing traffic on our interstates. We have, I understand, a new interstate that's being proposed to run to Kingman or to Las Vegas. So, what we see today is an ever-increasing fragmentation of bighorn habitats. And bighorn sheep, we know from studies and observations, are very hesitant to cross even barbed wire fences in their habitats. So we're very concerned about any type of physical barrier that will impede the movement of sheep. And one of the adaptations, by the way, of a desert-dwelling animal like bighorn sheep is to move where the rains have fallen. Because all of you who have lived in the desert knows that it can rain in the adjoining neighborhood an inch and your neighborhood gets nothing. That's just the variation and variability of rainfall. Well, the desert animals like the Sonoran pronghorn, deer, and bighorn, they're aware of that. They move and try to find those areas where it's green and where there's food. But if there are barriers to those movements, you can see where it can be quite harmful to their survival. This is a little closer graphic. This is the part of the state where I work, the southwestern portion. This is what we call Region 4, the Yuma region. And these are the mountain ranges where we still have bighorn sheep, although some areas are in the decline, and very seriously. This area here is the Sandtank Mountains, the Sauceda Mountains. The Sandtank Mountains are down to maybe 3 bighorn sheep, where some 15 years ago we had 60 or 70 bighorn. We're very concerned about this. Again, this decline could be caused by a number of factors. years. We're currently studying the role of disease in bighorn sheep in this area. We're very concerned about disease and its impacts to bighorn. We've been successful in reestablishing some of these mountain ranges like the Gila Bend Mountains. It was down to a very small number of sheep, and we translocated animals into that mountain range in the 1990s, and they're doing relatively well, although recently there's been a decline. So again, our concern is somewhat heightened. The same is true of the Eagle Tail Mountains, which are found in this area. I think we dropped to a low of 7 bighorn sheep before augmenting that population with translocated animals. I'm going to talk a little bit about the aerial survey work we do, because in my opinion, being able to estimate the size of the population of bighorn sheep is sort of the foundation of our wildlife management efforts, and we put a great deal of effort into this for a number of reasons. One, to fly in a helicopter, it's very expensive, it's somewhat dangerous, but really the number one thing is it's expensive. I think this helicopter costs us nearly $900 an hour to fly. You can cover a lot of area, you can gather a lot of good data, but $900 an hour, that's real money. So you want to make the most of that money and get as much information from that effort as you possibly can. This is typically what we see as we're flying by. We see the white rumps of bighorn, and if it's a large group of bighorn, we typically don't miss them. If it's a small group, maybe 1 or 2, it's very easy to miss because they often don't move. In any case, to refine our survey methods, we captured and collared bighorn sheep. In particular, we did this pilot study on the Kofa National Wildlife Refuge. And the reason for that is the Kofa, over the years, was always a very important source of bighorn sheep for translocation, for establishing bighorn in other areas of the state. So if you're taking sheep out of the Kofas, you want to be sure not to harm the Kofas by that effort, and you want to have the best available data so you can make good decisions with it. So in the mid-1990s, we decided it was time once again to refine this method. We undertook this study where we collared, I think it was 56 bighorn sheep, fitted them each with radio collars and ear tags. Typically, we capture females, by the way, because females are the really important animal in the herd, and we wanted to know what we could from the female segment more so than from rams. Rams, if you collar them, because of their combative nature and the fact that they butt heads, they actually destroy the collars. They tend to break them, and they're no use to us. But the way we use these radio collars is we would do a survey. Actually, we did multiple surveys. But after each survey, we would look back to see if the groups that had the collars in them were seen or missed. And we would then investigate, okay, if they were missed, why were they missed? Was it the habitat that they were in? Was it the group size? Did it have something to do with cloud cover? All those important variables that we thought needed to be investigated. And having the marked groups out there is very central and important to that effort. This is some of the data that resulted for the Kofa. This is just specifically for the Kofa Refuge. I arrived in Yuma in 1984, and much work was already being done on bighorn sheep, and they'd already transplanted several hundred bighorn sheep from the refuge, and I was just very proud to be a part of that effort. The first survey that we did, that I was able to participate in, we saw over 500 bighorn sheep during that survey. We estimated, using the methods at the time, over 900 sheep. That's this column up here. And also I want to point out, for your information, I included the number of bighorn transplanted during these surveys. That's this sort of purple color, and the number of rams harvested that year. So you can sort of see, at least certainly during the 80s and 90s, there's no correlation between transplanted bighorn sheep, rams harvested, and any cause and effect on the following year's population estimate. In other words, removing sheep by hunting or by translocation was, at those levels, was not great enough to cause the population trend to change. It's basically, those fluctuations probably are most likely explained by the variability of the survey, the inherent variability, the randomness of the results, and also the environmental conditions at the time. But the environment on COFA was relatively stable during those years. Most of those years it was relatively favorable to bighorn sheep recruitment. And because of the relative stability of that population, we decided around 1995 that it was no longer necessary to survey every year. So we decided to go to surveys every third year to save money, to put our resources elsewhere, and that kind of thing. And what happened is, there's still some variability, but the population tracked along like it had in the past to some degree. The first real dip here in around 1997 followed a drought year, 1996, that was so severe that the Sonoran pronghorn population that I mentioned earlier, we were closely monitoring that population, that 40% of the adults died in that population due to that same drought. So it was a very severe drought, and it taught us many lessons regarding Sonoran pronghorn ecology. We feel the same thing happened, the same sorts of influences were being pushed on bighorn sheep on the COFA. So the population declined around 600. However, we had relatively favorable weather conditions following that year, and the population increased again to around 800 animals around the year 2000. What happened next is part of the reason we're having this public information is the population declined again following a very severe drought in 2002. You might, if you lived in this state, you might remember that drought. It was a drought that, according to climatologists or people that study tree rings, the University of Arizona Laboratory, they said we haven't seen a drought like that since the 1400s, based on tree ring data. It was just a very severe drought, and depending on what, it was widespread across the state. It was so severe in our southern desert habitats that it changed the plant communities in the desert. It killed creosote bushes by, large swaths of our desert. The creosotes all died. And creosote's a pretty tough bush. And a drought that severe is very severe. It also killed cacti that the pronghorn are very much dependent upon. So, nobody disputes that a drought like that can have profound impacts on wildlife populations. In any case, the bighorn sheep herd had dropped from 800 to just over 600. There was alarm and concern, especially among conservationists in Yuma. I went on record saying, listen, all we need is some good rain, and the bighorn sheep will respond. They'll come back just like they did following 1996. I was wrong. I've been wrong before. I'll probably be wrong again. We did have favorable rainfall. We did have relatively wet conditions. The population continued to decline. It declined to just under 400 animals around the 2006 survey. So again, that's a real cause for concern for us because of course, bighorn sheep transplant program and the COFAs, how dependent we are on the COFA for that. We also manage. Arizona Game and Fish tries to manage what we call metapopulations. In other words, a metapopulation is an assemblage of populations that are linked together. They're not separated by highways or barriers. The animals can move back and forth freely. And in any case, we look at what we call this COFA metapopulation. It includes a very large piece of desert between interstates 8 and 10, highways 85 and 95. It's nearly 3 million acres. It's an amazing piece of desert real estate. It's unbroken. We hope to keep it that way. We hope to keep the ecology functioning properly. In any case, what we see here is generally a trend that's all mirroring what happened on the COFA, a downward trend. And that's very concerning to us. You can see back in 2000, within that metapopulation, we had what we thought were around 1,400 bighorn sheep. And we're currently down to just under 800, 770 some. So we've lost about half of those sheep since 2000. And the trend, we're afraid, is still downward. Because certainly one can argue, hey, 700 sheep, that's a lot of sheep. It is a lot of sheep. It's the trend that I'm most concerned with. And if the trend continues, we could be in a lot of trouble. We hope to avoid that. Many questions have been asked. What do we blame this decline on? And personally, I don't think we can ever know for sure why that decline occurred. And the reason for that is we were not out there doing the kinds of studies that explains those things. We were not monitoring bighorn sheep to see why they were dying. So we can only speculate now. I'm more concerned with how can we reverse the decline and what's inhibiting the decline or the reversing of that decline, what's inhibiting the sheep numbers from going back up. Some of the reasons offered by many people regarding why this decline occurred, speculation is that it was the transplant program. We took too many sheep out, or we took the wrong kind of sheep out. But again, the data doesn't support that, not for the long-term trends. Disease, well, disease is a real possibility. So we're investigating the role of disease in this population. We do that by catching bighorn sheep, taking blood samples, having them analyzed. So we're very concerned. Certainly disease is a possible culprit. The disturbance, what we mean by that is human disturbance. We know from studies that have been conducted that if you flood an area, say a lambing area, or an area that bighorn sheep happen to be lambing in, and you have constant disturbance of humans with maybe their dog or something else, that it can have negative impacts on bighorn sheep and the survival of those young. So we're looking at that aspect as well. Drought, the effects of drought can be quite obvious if it's severe enough. Obviously, if there's no food, then it's hard for a mother to make milk and for the lambs to survive. And if the drought goes on long enough, we believe that it actually leads to the death through starvation of the adults, even healthy adults, one-time healthy. And of course, predation. There's many sources of predation that we're looking at. We know from the literature that in some cases even golden eagles can take the lambs of bighorn sheep. Bobcats are known to take adults and young bighorn sheep. Mountain lions, of course, can be a predator of bighorn sheep, just to name a few. Once again, we have some data that's very useful in examining these hypotheses. In the 1990s, when we collared the 56 bighorn sheep so we'd understand the aerial survey methods, we actually looked at what happened when the animals died. And we investigated 17 different mortalities. 3 of them were drownings, and that was during this horrible drought year. And what happened is these 3 bighorn sheep jumped into natural water holes, these natural tanahas, which are nothing more than a big gouged out hole in the rock. Unfortunately, the bighorn were so desperate for water that they jumped in one after another into these death traps and couldn't escape. So in one case, we found 2 radio collars in one pothole, along with other sheep. There were other unmarked sheep. But in any case, at least 3 of these radio collars died that way during that drought. 3 died to what we called sinusitis. In other words, it's probably disease-related, at least with that disease. It shortened their life. We had 6 that we weren't sure what they died of. They probably died of starvation, but there was no sign of predation. In any case, another one died of a fall. And that's actually not uncommon with bighorn sheep. They live in a very, difficult habitat, and they make mistakes, and they often fall to their deaths. It's not very uncommon. And 4 others, we never could tell what happened to them. There was so little left by the time we got there because we were late in investigating the mortality that we weren't conclusive. We were unable to be conclusive about what might have killed them. Now contrast that to what we're doing now. We undertook an effort to capture and radio collar bighorn sheep. We fitted these animals with standard radio collars in some cases, and in other cases, as budgets would allow, we fitted them with these high-tech GPS satellite collars that Ron was talking about that have allowed us to gather such interesting information on mountain lions. Well, these radio collared animals, and I'm trying to remember how many we have. 48, I believe, 48 radio collars. Well, they die for various reasons during this study. 9 of them have been to mountain lion predation. So that's in contrast to the 1990s, where we were unable to document a single case of mountain lion predation. Because of the technology's better, we're able to respond more quickly. We were able to get out there and see, what happened to this animal relatively soon after its death. And the signs of especially lion predation are very obvious. Mountain lions try to cover their food cache. They try to hide it from, a scavenger. In any case, there's lots of evidence left behind. One was due to the capture itself. In other words, the animal was stressed too much. Something happened and it died. So it was an error in the handling of the animal. Another one was basically thought to have been caught in a storm and drowned. It was thought to have drowned due to a flash flood. And one other one, we couldn't tell why it died, but there was no sign at all of predation. So something seems to have changed from the 1990s to now, and at least this data points to mountain lions as being a relatively significant factor. Of those collars, that's a fairly high percentage if you look at it on an annual basis of the population, because these radio-collared animals are representative of the population, and whatever rate they die in is most likely pretty reflective of what's happening to the rest of the herd. We also, I should say, the Fish and Wildlife Service initiated a study looking at the health of bighorn sheep and how it relates to their reproductive capabilities. In other words, is this ewe healthy? Does that explain the survival or lack of survival of her young? And what that entails is they would catch a bighorn sheep. They would use ultrasonic equipment that would measure the amount of body fat, which gives an indicator of how healthy she is. And they could also, through other tests, determine if she gave birth that year and what happened. If through the field investigations, they try to follow this particular collared animal around to see, did she give birth? Did her lamb survive? Was it recruited into the population? And correlate that all together with basically the health of the bighorn. And that's related to, of course, questions about the habitat quality of COFA habitat at this time. By the way, this is an adult female. She's in what I'd call fair condition. She's not quite poor. She's not good. She's in that limbo area. And that could be related to the fact that she raised a lamb to this point, because it does cost quite a bit to nurse a lamb for 3 or 4 months, and the female sacrifices to some degree. She's also with another younger female in this picture. Again, this is an example of this meta-population that I was describing. And it's, again, bounded by Interstates 8 and 10, Highways 85 and 95, which is, again, a very valuable resource to us. And we hope to keep it unfragmented. I want to talk about the recruitment of bighorn sheep within this large area. For the COFA, who's our most recent population estimate, we think there's 436 roughly. Bighorn sheep on the COFA, well, that year they were only recruiting 39 new individuals into the population. So that's relatively low, but it's more or less typical of what we see in bighorn sheep. It's a little above average in some respects. To the north, just off the COFA, in the New Water Mountains, the population is only around 43 bighorn sheep. There were no yearlings observed during the survey. And to the east and south, in Unit 41 West, we believe there's around 100 bighorn sheep, only 6 yearlings. In the Eagle Tail Mountains, which is one of my favorite mountain ranges, it's a very beautiful piece of habitat. It's a designated wilderness. There's some visitation, but it's a very remote piece of Arizona. We have about 136 bighorn sheep and only 3 yearlings. The Gila Bend Mountains, another translocated, reestablished herd, only 59 sheep, 3 yearlings. So all combined, we only have 51 yearlings in this 3 million odd acres of habitat. That's not a lot of animals. we're looking at the influence of lion predation on bighorn sheep. These are photographs taken by Trailmaster cameras left or stationed on COFA water holes. I think currently the COFA folks are monitoring 13 different water holes on the refuge. We're also monitoring water holes surrounding the COFA to varying extents. But the difference is this is not uncommon to catch on these cameras mountain lions at these water holes. By the way, the upper left-hand photo of the female with a kitten, that's a spring. It's a natural spring that they modified a little bit to collect water so it pools up more efficiently. And there are many, many natural waters on COFA, by the way. In this part of the state, it's actually one of the most naturally watered pieces of habitat. And I think it's no coincidence that the COFA was set aside by Roosevelt in 1938 for bighorn sheep conservation, because that's where you could still find bighorn sheep in Arizona in 1938. And it's probably related to the coincidence of having natural water and being good habitat where bighorn sheep could persist at that time in any significant number. Now, since the start of our study looking at lion predation, we've been able to collar 5 adult males. And this is reflective of the data that we've collared. We've given symbols, not names, to the lions, like KMO1. And during the time period that we were investigating what it ate, this is what we found in its preference to bighorn sheep. It would eat a bighorn sheep on average around every 19 days. Now, as you go through the different lines, you can see there's quite a bit of variation in the preference of diet among desert male lions that we've sampled thus far, with KMO4 taking a bighorn sheep around every 10 days, and RMO1, which was captured over in the Gila Bend Mountains, having the least preference, I should say, for bighorn sheep, and that's one bighorn about every 56 days. And basically what I've done is then take an average of, because it's hard to predict what the next line we capture, what his preference will be. But if you were to just assume it was something similar to this average, it would be one bighorn sheep per lion every 32 days. Now, just to give you an idea of the potential impacts to bighorn sheep from lion predation, through the use of camera work, which is a very conservative way of trying to estimate the number of lions on the COFA in particular, we've been saying that there's 4, maybe 5 lions on the COFA range at any one given time. Knowing that they go on and off the COFA, they're not necessarily there all on the same day, but for the most part, on average, there's probably 4 or 5. This is what KMO4's potential impact on bighorn sheep based on his diet preferences would be. He would take around 35 or so bighorn sheep annually. Now, the orange line there is yearling recruitment. And again, that's thought to be what last year's recruitment for COFA would be. So you can see that one line alone could take nearly the entire recruitment class or equivalent of bighorn sheep on COFA. Now, if we assume that we had KMO4 and 2 average males and 1 female, and we had to go to the literature because we've been unsuccessful trying to capture a female or any female in this type of desert environment, they're more wary, by the way. They're more shy, so they're more cautious and most likely more difficult to catch. So we go to the literature, and the literature suggests that a female, especially a female with kittens, may take a large prey item about every 5 days because they're feeding more than themselves, they're feeding their young. And if we assume half of that might be bighorn sheep, then we can take a guess as to what impact that might be on bighorn sheep. And using those figures, we come close to 90 bighorn sheep in a year. Or 3 average males and 1 female, because KMO4 was very much a specialist of bighorn sheep. He ate almost entirely bighorn sheep. I think in the 6 months that we monitored him, he only killed 2 mule deer that we know of and 16 bighorn sheep. So in any case, if we just took an average of males and females, you could see the impact of KMO4. It would still be above what our recruitment is expected to be for bighorn sheep on COFA. So this is concerning to us. We're concerned about the direction this population is going and what influence lions may be having on bighorn sheep on COFA and within the meta population. I throw this slide in because this is Charlie Dye tank on the COFA. And several years ago, in the 1990s, we basically replaced the old system, the need to haul the old system, which is in the center with the roof section, with a new system. The new system is a buried underground storage system, which, because the water is stored in tanks that you cannot see, it's buried below ground level. It's much more efficient at storing the water. There's less water lost to evaporation compared to the original water hole that's in the center of the screen. What the problem with those designs is, as you can see, it's located in a wash, and under the right type of flow, sediment is carried into the tank and it displaces water, and it's very prone to evaporation. And in a desert environment where evaporation occurs every single day, that's a real problem if you're trying to keep water in that tank for wildlife. And consequently, the COFA folks were faced with hauling water frequently to the old system or replacing it with something more efficient, and that's what we did. And the controversy is this is located in wilderness, and some folks believe we shouldn't be able to put structures in wilderness. You know, our interpretation is different. We believe that the law allows us to do this if you go through the proper process. One of the consequences of not having COFA in a healthy condition, having enough surplus sheep to be able to move them, is we have a waiting list. There are implications for bighorn sheep beyond the COFA and the metapopulation boundaries. This is just a list of where we would like to augment bighorn sheep. And we're going to have to look elsewhere from the COFA for the foreseeable future to do this. I didn't include a graphic, but we've sent desert bighorn sheep to Texas, New Mexico, Colorado, you know, many places in Arizona. And I know folks in Mexico would like to get bighorn sheep if they could to reestablish them in Mexico. They're just not available at this time. Another consequence is in California, they've actually had to list 2 subspecies of bighorn sheep because of the impacts to these herds, and the consequences are dramatic. Number one, if it's a federally listed species, then the Endangered Species Act, of course, dominates, and there's high cost involved with recovery. And unfortunately, there isn't the money. You know, they write a recovery plan, and they spell out what it takes to fix it, but as we all know, money's in short supply, and I'm afraid, although somewhat protected by the Endangered Species Act, if you don't have the money to get the job done and recover them, you're in trouble. And as you can see, active lion predator management is occurring to keep these endangered species from going extinct. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, John. My goodness, what an interesting animal that is. That one picture looked like they were waiting for you to stop and take their picture, actually. So, all right. Now, Pat Barber's going to come together and pull all this together for us and kind of bring in the management objectives and some of the things that the department's doing to manage both of these species. So, with that, Pat Barber.
All right, thanks, Doug. Yeah, and my section here is probably going to be shorter than the other two. They're the real experts that put a lot more time in managing these species than I have. What I hope to do is kind of demonstrate the decision-making process and how we arrive at our recommended actions and what we go forward and do. This map was up before, and I put it up here just to kind of demonstrate a starting point for how we define the management decisions we have to make. So this is kind of the big picture, and you heard all the data and the information from both Ron and John. And, you know, one of the things that we are doing is trying to manage our mountain lion population. And we get criticisms for doing that. People feel differently about it. Starting here, I just wanted to point out that this is the COFA refuge, and we don't manage for biodiversity in that small of a scale, okay? So if if we don't have lions there potentially, which that's not our goal, and I'll get into that, but if we don't have lions there, that doesn't really affect the biodiversity around the state. The darker brown is the mountain lion habitat. So just to explain that biodiversity question, we're looking at biodiversity, in that metapopulation area and across the state in general. And John also mentioned the fact that there are populations of bighorn sheep that are listed as endangered populations, and how difficult and expensive it is to recover these populations. And we figure that our responsibility as the state's wildlife management agency is to avoid getting there if we can. We don't want to wait to do management until the population's endangered. A consistent source of debate is exactly how we do this, and I referred a minute ago to the mountain lion issue, and I'll get back to that. But first I wanted to use an example of another species. This is the Sonoran pronghorn. Its current range within the United States is south of Interstate 8 and west of Highway 85 that goes down to Ajo. This is 1,500 acres of generally of protected habitat. This is very protected habitat. You have the Cabeza Prieta National Wildlife Refuge, Organ Pipe National Monument, and the Berriem Goldwater Range. And human activity within this area is very regulated. Now, lately we have had issues with undocumented folks and smugglers coming across there, and that is an issue. But historically, that's been pretty well protected. But I guess the question is that protection enough? And some people assert that when we have what we think are population issues in an area, that we should just step back, keep our hands off, and let nature take its course. Let it reach its natural balance. I think John did a pretty good job, explaining why this isn't a natural system anymore, and there are a lot of barriers and a lot of challenges for the wildlife populations. In terms of the Sonoran pronghorn, it's the same thing. They can't follow those rain patterns as John demonstrated. They can't get to the Gila River, which is a historical water source for them. And their movement even through the border prior to the fence has been severely restricted. And we got a lot of criticism in managing Sonoran pronghorn initially. A lot of the things that we thought needed to be done, some folks opposed. And ultimately, in 2002, and probably as a result of that drought that John referenced earlier, the population went down to 21 animals in the United States, very close to being extinct. At that point, we were finally able to get approval to move forward on some of the active management programs that we've implemented since then. Man-made water sources in wilderness areas and out, forage enhancement, and we've actually created a captive breeding facility where we've captured some wild Arizona animals and some from Mexico and put them in there. We can ensure this is, oh, sorry, the picture there, wrong one. The picture is actually in the captive breeding facility, and we do supplemental feeding. Basically, in that captive breeding facility, we can really control the causes of mortality, and we can ensure that we get higher levels of recruitment, and then we can ultimately release animals back into the wild. So this has been pretty successful. We're currently over 100 animals combined between the captive breeding facility and the wild. And currently we're doing NEPA work preparing for a second population where we'll actually create a second captive breeding facility, move animals there, and hopefully recreate that success and have a much larger than that 21 animals that were there in 2001 population, and move towards delisting, which is always our goal in these cases. So again, can we do nothing? Is this a natural system where we can just step back and let nature take its course? We don't think that we can. And if you look at the map, comparing kind of the area where the Sonoran pronghorn are, knowing the history there, and comparing the metapopulation that John talked about, you can see some pretty good similarities. The department is also, I'd like to point out, been active and successful in many cases in managing endangered species and sensitive species and trying to recover them. Bald eagle, black-footed ferrets, Chiricahua leopard frogs. There's a pretty long list, and those aren't all recovered, but we have had some successes. And I would assert that almost all of our successes have come as a result of active management, out there doing things, reintroducing animals where they've been extirpated, doing other things. And I'm unaware of any case where there was an endangered species that we just left it alone and protected it and it was recovered. That case may exist. I'm not aware of it. So we also believe that active management is necessary up around the COFA. And the process, how we got there, John and Ron talked about the science. And we got a lot of our experts together, including John and Ron and others, along with folks from other agencies, Fish and Wildlife Service, and started going through the science, looking at the data that we had, determining what extra data do we need to collect. I'd like to clarify one thing. John mentioned probably about a dozen times literature, and I'm not sure he explained that. And some of you that haven't worked in science may not know what that means. Every time there's a research study done, or almost every time, there's a report that's published in a journal or somewhere else. And that whole body of work, which is all the wildlife research that's ever been taking place or documented, that's referred to as the literature. So when we have a question of what's going on in wildlife and what have others learned that we could benefit from, we go to the literature. It's a pretty exhaustive process. And if you go to the back of any research paper, there'll be a list, sometimes many pages long, of all the previous research studies that they've gone to and referenced. So we've done that, and we analyzed all that information. We come up with a proposed management direction. These 3 plans here are examples of that. And we manage wildlife for the state of Arizona, and we want to do that transparently. All of the science that we did, just about all the data we have is available on our website. This isn't very clear, but right down here, the second from the end is a references section, and that's specifically all those scientific studies that we looked at. And I would encourage anybody that has a question about what we're doing or how we got there to look at that. You could spend days, probably weeks, going through all the documents that are available there. And out of those, we talked a lot about predation, and John talked about some of the other issues. We did identify activities, active management activities, to try to recover this bighorn sheep population. Estimate population parameters. John talked about how we're constantly testing our assumptions and our methods to make sure we're as effective as we can be. He talked about the waters. We want to ensure year-round water availability. If we make a system more effective, if we can put water in an area where there is none that would allow sheep to now utilize habitat that they couldn't use before, we want to do that. Monitor disease occurrence. As he mentioned, we're doing that. Reduce disease transmission, reduce the negative impact of human recreational activities. Fish and Wildlife Service is looking at this on the COFA. They're looking at data of people coming in on roads and trying to determine if there's some regulatory mechanism they can use to help the sheep that way. Continue the management of the COFA bighorn population as a transplant resource. That is our ultimate goal. I don't know if John explicitly stated that since that decline in 2006, we stopped doing transplants. So he discussed, pretty extensively whether transplants contributed to the decline. Some people may debate that. I think our data says it is not a cause. But the bottom line is, as soon as we knew we were in trouble, we stopped it. That's something that we can control. And we're not going to continue transplants until the population gets close to its historic levels. We want to continue to offer bighorn sheep hunting opportunities consistent with sheep conservation. Some people, I guess, are confused that we allow people to hunt while the population is declining. Our hunting guidelines are very conservative in nature. We hunt only the older males, or that's what we target. Only males are available to hunt. And we control that annually. We look at the data, and it's very responsive. We adjust the permit levels annually based on the data that we collected the year before. And if you remember that graph that showed the population, since the population declined, we've been allowing people to hunt. But you could not pick out the color of that marker on the end because we've actually reduced the number of permits. And hunting, is an honorable pursuit. People do that. It raises and continues to maintain interest in this important sheep population. A lot of the active management things that we've described that we've done in the past and we plan to do in the future, those are staffed by volunteers, usually hunters that are interested in bighorn sheep and their conservation. Raise public awareness, that's one of the reasons we're here right now. And then we get into the predation part and what we're doing with predators. And I'm not going to go into great length on our predation management strategy right now. Those documents, like I said, are available online. This is more of an educational venue, but this is kind of the big question that's hanging out there. But essentially what we want to do is called an adaptive management approach. And some people might call this research. They might call it a study. It is adaptive management. You can read through that. I'm not going to read it to you. But essentially what adaptive management does is we use all that science and the data we have, like I described, to determine what management activity we want to do. And then as we start doing that, we collect data, we analyze that data, and see if there is some way that we can improve what we're doing. So it's a constant feedback loop. We're constantly looking at data. That's what we're doing with lions. John indicated we're collaring lions and sheep. We're collecting that data and constantly looking at it and analyzing it. So in short, the proposed action on the COFA, and again, this is not verbatim. There's many documents you can look through to see exactly what those recommendations are, but the bottom line is we want to cover COFA sheep. This is not a mountain lion management activity in so much as it is a sheep recovery activity. Data and science indicates, that lion predation is limiting recovery on the sheep herd. That's the data that we have, that John reviewed. That's what's in the literature. All the other research studies that have been done that show that it's pretty consistent. Removal of individuals, lethal removal of individuals that prey on sheep is warranted at this time. We don't see any other way to protect the sheep population and prevent it from getting to a point where it has to be listed as endangered or something worse. But again, this is adaptive management, and we're collecting data. And when the declining trend is reversed, we can stop removal of lions, and that's built into the plans. The end goal is not to remove all the lions from the COFA. It's to recover the sheep herd. And if we go into the mode of removing lions when the sheep herd recovers to a level where we think it's pretty safe, then we stop removing lions. And we continually collect data. And if somewhere in there our data tells us that we need to do something different, we'll do something different. And I think that's the end of my presentation. So hopefully we gave you guys some interesting information, helpful. Hopefully we kind of put it all together to show how we come up with our management direction. And I guess now we'll make ourselves available for questions.
Yeah, now you get the targets put on you. Thank you, Pat. Pretty interesting stuff. I'm going to steal that wireless mic because I'm going to have to run around with it.
Okay.
So we'll ask and see if anybody has any questions. Thank you very much, sir. All right. So what do you guys think? Any questions? There's a lot of information, isn't it? All right. Let me turn this off and I'll run around. Hold your hand up. Make sure this is working. Working good? You had your hand up, sir? I passed you right up, didn't I?
20-odd years ago, I saw a presentation by Matt Pierce and Harley Shaw, and their idea that out in the desert near us, mountain lions were kicked out males. There were males that couldn't hold a territory or too young to get one. And now all of a sudden, 25 years or so later, we've got females and babies all over the place. What happened with the lion population? Were they always there and we just didn't know?
And you guys will have to use the podium and just push the button, make sure the mic's on. And what area was that?
Just generally in the desert they were talking about.
Yeah, I can address that to some extent, maybe because I was on one of the surveys that Matt Pierce actually sponsored and he regularly had volunteers out there to run a lion track surveys. We thought that was a good way to count mountain lions. Until when we ran statistics on it, we realized we need to run about 150 routes, about 5 miles long, and we couldn't afford the manpower. But I was out there, and there was at that time a male that was collared by Matt, and I found his track. I couldn't believe it, and I followed him. We walked my route, and we all came back that day, and that he was the only one that we actually detected that day. So that was just kind of an indication to me when Matt was doing that hey, maybe there aren't a lot of mountain lions out here. I really thought there might have been, but there weren't. In addition to that, there were two concerted department track survey routes that were run for over 10 days at a time by Harley Shaw and other experienced trackers. One in about 1986, 85, another one in 10 years later in that 96 period. During those two intensive track surveys of all those mountain ranges in this area, there was one mountain lion track, I think, found in one or two mountain ranges, and that was it. There no other really indication of mountain lion sign, scat. Now you can go to the COFA any day, and I can show anybody in this room a mountain lion track. Hope that answers your questions.
And we had one more.
I was curious about the slide that had feral goat and the disease related to goats. If they're feral, can't they just be hunted out?
Goats are property of somebody, so they're covered by state statute to protect them to some extent, but they certainly can be removed. I can recall at least one case where a person in Kingman, his goats got away from him. And we actually used a helicopter because the goats went into a mountain range that was full of bighorn sheep. We used a helicopter to remove the goats because although it was very expensive and it was somewhat dangerous, it was the right thing to do at the time to protect the bighorn. And BLM has a policy guarding bighorn sheep and allotments for grazing domestic sheep. And there's an exclusion zone. I think it's 20 miles or more. But there are some safeguards in place to try to keep bighorn sheep and goats and domestic sheep from mixing. Yeah.
Is there a significant contact with goats? I mean, the science says transfer disease, but is it significant at this point?
More or less, no. But there are exceptions. Even in Yuma, where bighorn habitat comes right down to private property. And of course, on private property, the owner can have domestic sheep and goats, and often do. And in the case of Dome Valley, which is just outside of Yuma, we have documented more than one case where bighorn sheep will come down. They're actually attracted to domestic sheep. And it's usually males, the rams, coming down and mixing with the domestic sheep on private pastures. Even though the pastures may have electric fences to exclude predators and so forth, they get in, and the result is predictable. The bighorn sheep usually are dead and rather quickly. So there's still an influence. It's not what necessarily drives the trend of population nowadays. But the problem for us is there are many diseases that are out there that were thought to be introduced by European livestock 300 years ago maybe, that are still influencing wildlife today, even though the cattle aren't there or the goats or whatever. The diseases are still there.
Thank you. Let me jump to a couple. We got actually from some of our online viewers, we got a number of questions emailed in, so let me mix it up a little bit with that, and then I'll take some more questions from the audience if that's all right. We actually had really good participation of people watching online as well. And then I'll let you guys decide who this should go to. This was from Brian, and the question is, how important are man-made water developments to bighorn sheep populations?
Well, we believe it's a tool to be used to help conserve bighorn sheep, and my personal opinion is it's the least we can do to help mitigate some of the other human impacts that have been placed upon bighorn sheep, whether it's the fragmentation of their habitat by highways, canals, alteration of their habitat, like the conversion of the Gila River to agriculture with associated canals that bighorn drowned in, or fences that exclude them from, movement corridors, or the diseases that have been introduced. I mean, you can go on and on, the types of impacts humans have had and continue to have on bighorn sheep. What we know about water is that, especially during very dry periods of time, it's very important to bighorn sheep to help the digestion of food. An animal that has access to free water can eat different foods. If a bighorn, and I was involved in a study in the 1980s where we actually observed bighorn sheep adults going for as long as 10 days without drinking water. And that's very unique adaptation. I admire bighorn sheep for that. By the way, it's thought that they developed this adaptation not in the desert, but in the cold deserts where they evolved, because water conservation in the Arctic is just as important as it is down here. When everything's frozen, you can't drink water. You still need water to ruminate food, to rid the body of waste. So it's thought of as a pre-adaptation to the desert. In other words, they came here with advantages already in their physiology. We think, again, the placement of waters is a relatively minor thing. It has a tremendous influence under the right conditions. If we get a lot of rain and the habitat's wet, a lot of natural water holes, a man-made water hole has probably no influence whatsoever that year. But if we go into a devastating drought that can last months, if not years, then water holes can be very important to the survival of at least adults. Because if you're not familiar with ruminant physiology, the fermentation of the foods they eat involves a lot of water. And a bighorn has a choice. If it eats cactus to try to gain its moisture needs, it's consuming something that's very low in nutrition, takes up a lot of space in the rumen, and it's going to get less digestible energy and nutrients from, if compared to switching to a diet of higher protein, carbohydrate, and using water for the fermentation. So,
Going to walk out of here with a biology degree for sure. Okay, I'm going to take one more from online because this one comes up on a regular basis, and I think this is going to be for you, Ron. This is from Peggy from online. Why is it not possible to relocate lions instead of killing them? So.
Thank you, Peggy. The answer to that is that you can translocate mountain lions. It's not a preferred method of wildlife management, though. First of all, you're moving a animal that it has a huge homing instinct. In New Mexico, they did do a translocation study using 14 animals, and 9 of those animals eventually experienced a mortality because of the reasons related to the translocation. 2 of the mountain lions out of the 14 actually went 300 miles or over back to this very same canyon that they were removed from. Pretty amazing homing instincts. So that's one thing you'd have to contend with. You'd have to move the thing far enough in terms of just getting away from the problem area itself. And then where are you moving it to? Are you moving it someplace where there's even an additional problem of bighorn sheep? Or some other problem that they might cause, maybe a human interaction. Once we move an animal, we're pretty much responsible for his actions. So it's a huge consideration on our part.
Okay. We'll get back to the audience here. Did anybody else have a question? And I'll get my runner going. Hold on.
Have a lot, but I'll only ask one. How do you know that there's not some type of cumulative impact of the translocations? There are a lot of things that you don't see from year to year in a population, but over time there might be a cumulative impact. Either we know the animals, for example, are very sensitive to disruption. You talked about that. So I wondered if you'd address that.
Sure. It's always difficult to know what you don't know. But the data doesn't suggest that for example, during the 80s and 90s where we were taking 30 to 45 bighorn every year, that it was having an impact the next year. And, the question is open-ended. When would you see the cumulative impacts if it was occurring? And from a population of 800, 900 or more, if you're taking 30 animals, that's a relatively small sample. And the way we go out and capture these animals it has, I would say, a lot to do with the opportunity to take them safely. In other words, if I saw a herd that was, next to a 300-foot cliff, and we thought, getting close to them would possibly harm them, we just pass them up. We look for animals that are in habitats that are more accessible for us and where we can safely capture the animal. It certainly doesn't do us any good to harm an animal in the attempt to capture it and translocate it. And I would also say that from other sources of translocated sheep, for example, the Plumosa Mountains, we took much higher percentages of the population during those same time periods. Say a population of 150, 200, we were taking 20, 25 animals out of those, we'd see the same thing. Basically, there might be a small depression in the population the next year, but it would come back. So we would take those animals maybe every other year. But we exerted actually more pressure on adjacent populations in our translocation program than we actually did on COFA. But it's an open-ended question. The cumulative effects, there could be some, but I don't know what they would be because of the relative limited number of sheep that we were extracting year after year, and the selective nature of it. Taking one or two animals from a herd and then moving on. Because again, it was very important to us not to chase the same herd over and over again during the day, because of course that could lead to very harmful effects on the animals that are being pursued.
Over here. Good job. All right, sir.
Okay. My question is, you have an active management plan that clearly has been supported by data. How will you report back to us or the public your progress against that plan?
Pat, why don't you take that one?
The plans that we have in place now, they don't contain a specific report back to the public requirement. But we would anticipate to be doing news releases. I mean, one of the identified strategies was to do that public outreach. In addition, we are monitoring these populations on an annual basis now. And as John indicated, at one point we were going once every 3 years, or every 3 years. And so that stuff is published every year in our hunt recommendation process. We have, the Hunt Arizona book, which shows our survey results. We do that every year for every place in the state that we do management.
We've been announcing the results of the survey every year. We will again, the next survey is coming up in October, and we will, as we have every year since we started this project, we will be publishing a press release. All those press releases and updates are also on that same website. And so we've been doing that every year since 2015.
I'm getting them to pull that up right now. Can I bump in?
Sure.
Sorry. Let me make sure I take this off. That's a great question. We do have one page, and it's probably been said. I just want to make sure it's on the microphone, sir, not that your answer wasn't correct. On our website, we've actually dedicated a complete section. It's titled COFA, and it refers to that southwestern population of desert bighorn sheep. Oddly enough, there's other bighorn sheep populations that probably require the same type of attention up in the Black Mountains up by Kingman. It's a very similar situation. So this website, is it up here? Okay. It's extremely extensive. This is where a lot of this reference materials are found. Every press release that's been released related to this situation is available under the news release or press release section. I can speak on behalf. I pretty much pick up the role for sending out the news releases. There's also a public information officer in Yuma. So this is a high priority. It's a critical issue for us, and we definitely, our goal is to be transparent with the public. So if the survey results that we're planning on running in October come back positive, favorable, or negative, whatever that situation may be, it's a process we did for the public, so we're going to report on it. It'll be, most of our stuff is sent out to statewide media as well as to a constituent mailing list. Anybody can subscribe to the media that comes out there out of the Arizona Game and Fish Department. You can go to our website. There's a place that you can sign up for news releases or media advisories, about news stories and things related to the department. And that's the whole gamut of the department. It's not just COFA. It could be a boating workshop or OHV program. Excellent. So we want you to be informed. We want to be able to inform you. We want our constituents to be engaged. So our goal is to keep you informed, regardless of what that information is, be it positive or negative, depending on what viewpoint you have. So I hope that answers your question. I got some more questions. Can I do one more from online, just because we had an amazing response of people watching online, which is just kind of, we're talking about 21st century wildlife management, and here we are, 21st century public communication, so it's pretty exciting. This is from, let me make sure I do the same one. And this one's going to be for you, Ron, I believe. This one's from Mike. I camp and recreate along the Boys Quartzsite Road. Forgive me if I pronounce boys wrong. Bouse Quartzsite Road on BLM land. My wife is terrified of a mountain lion attack while we rock hunt in the desert washes and trails off the main road. Is there any need for concern? Is this mountain lion territory? Make sure that's off.
All of Arizona is mountain lion territory, I think is what we found out. And we did have a collared animal that has crossed that Quartzsite Road a couple of times. So I know your exact camp spot, and it was close. Relative to are you safe? Yes, you are safe. Are you in danger of a mountain lion attack? No, not really. We're talking 4 to 5 attacks a year in the United States is what has been the average. So if you're really concerned, I wouldn't go on the freeway, because that's a far more dangerous activity than being camped out on near the COFA.
And I would offer that there is also information on the website about how to behave around lions.
All right, let me take one more from the audience since you guys are all waiting patiently. Hold on, okay? You had your hand up before I did the online, right? Then I'll go back to number 12. All right.
Is the Game and Fish looking to remove more lions from the COFA? If so, are they looking for people or hunters to help or come out and do that?
When we talk about the COFA, as in the COFA National Wildlife Refuge, mountain lion hunting is not allowed on the COFA refuge. It is allowed in the surrounding units. In all of our policies regarding predators, if there's a need for us to reduce the predator population, our first and always most preferred method is the sportsmen do that. So we would encourage people to go out and around the COFA if they have a desire to, and look for mountain lions and take them legally during the season. That's available in Unit 41, 43A and B, 44B North, but it's not allowed on the COFA refuge. Was there another part of your question?
But do you ever post or add, if you want to hunt mountain lions, come out here? Or basically, no, you don't do that. Like, if you had a problem in a certain unit, would you notify the public, hey, we have a problem, we'd like sportsmen to come out, versus us, the Game and Fish, doing it?
I think we've done that intermittently in news releases. We certainly do that informally, talking to sportsmen and stuff. But as far as I'm aware, we have not, done regular postings on where to go predator hunting.
It's obvious the data is showing that lions are taking a number of bighorn sheep. Do you have any data that reflects the number of predatory incidences that coyotes are taking on yearling sheep?
The answer to that is no. Although it's in the literature that coyotes are a predator of bighorn sheep. I think Ron referenced some of the genetic work that's being done through the University of Arizona, and we can expand that. We hope to expand that outside the COFA to larger pieces of southwestern Arizona, and the same techniques can apply. I mean, we can pick up coyote scat and analyze it to learn more about the diet and whether or not bighorn is part of that diet. But yeah, I would venture a guess that coyotes and bighorn sheep do not overlap a lot in their habitat, and the methods by which coyotes take large prey really don't lend themselves very well to bighorn sheep habitat. So it's probably something that occurs, but it's probably relatively rare.
Okay, it's getting kind of late. Do I have any more questions here from the audience that's here? Any follow-up questions? Want me to read one more from the online questions? You guys interested in these other ones? All right, let's see if we can find a good one here. Okay, this one's from Dennis. Is the Arizona Game and Fish Department willing to use preventive measures to manage lion bighorn sheep conflicts?
We have a coin.
I can pick someone.
Preventive measure. First of all, I'd like to point out that all these questions are good questions, and they will be responded to. So I want to thank everybody out there in cyberspace for sending these things in. Dennis, are we as a department willing to use preventive measures to manage? I assume that you may be talking about some aversive type actions, for instance, to try to keep mountain lions away from bighorn sheep. There's not been a whole lot in the literature that actually addresses that. There's been a little bit of work relative to placing, for instance, tiger urine in some areas to try to see if it would scare off mountain lions. A bigger carnivore scaring off a smaller one. Not a lot of good, positive, significant results. Really, relatively none. There might be some things in the future that are futuristic that we might be able to do. We might have something at a water station that recognizes the signature of a mountain lion as it does for an elk on the highway, and then makes a sound like, hey, it's time to leave. I don't know. That's a whole open field, and we're constantly looking at what people are possibly using out there. And right now, there's just not a lot that we can do to keep mountain lions off of bighorn sheep from predating on bighorn sheep in an area as large as southwest Arizona. It's just a huge, huge country. If any of you have ever been out there, I get lost most of the time myself when I go out there. Thank you.
And I would add that the methods that I'm aware of, and some have been developed by some of the predator or mountain lion NGOs. I think Mountain Lion Foundation is pretty active in this area. But most of the applications, or all of them that I've ever seen, apply to domestic type animals, where animals are pinned up in a small confined area. And as Ron kind of indicated, as I've seen, none of those are even going to come close to working with any wild population, let alone bighorn sheep.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, everybody online that submitted all those questions, and everybody here in our audience that sat through this and enjoyed this. I'm just going to kind of table this as we got 21st century technology and ideas of doing something as far as diversion or something in an area that's so remote that it's inhibited by technology because it is so old world. So it's obviously a very, very complicated or very dynamic species. Bighorn sheep with the reproduction cycle of a slow turning clock, and mountain lions as elusive as they are. So very interesting subjects, no doubt. So I encourage everybody to sign up to our newsletters. You can find out more information about the game and fish, or particularly about this situation. You can grab a card on your way out when you exit, or online, you can go to the just type in sign up after our web address, and you'll be able to get our news releases, memos, and other newsletters that we do electronically. I can't thank you all enough for coming and spending 2 hours of your Wednesday night out here in the far north reaches of Phoenix. I know it's a long drive, and everybody that had to roll over to their easy chair and log in online, thank you very much for sticking by, and we appreciate you guys coming out and to our panel. Ron, Pat, John, thank you very much for bringing this presentation to us. Thank you very much.